Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today I'm joined by Kurt Sasso. Kurt, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our worldwide audience. Tell us all about the show. So over to you, Kurt.
Well, it's going to be, I'll make it as tight as I can, but my standard introduction is, hey, all, Kurt Sasso here from Two Geeks Talking, the entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, as I said, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. But I'm not the host today. I'm a guest on an amazing show, the Global Discussion. I happen to see this from Rena Watts, who was on a guest on the show as well too. So I immediately had to come on. So if Rena's been on the show, I want to at least follow her in some way, shape, or form. But getting back to my story, I started this show back in 2008. I have over 1,200 plus episodes now. I originally started it as a podcast where I was interviewing webcomic creators because they needed a platform. They needed a voice back in 2008 to showcase their talent in a very diverse independent scene. I switched over to video interviews in about 2012, where I went to my very first comic convention at C2E2, which is an amazing show. Chicago is just an incredible town. Although I am Canadian, that was my very first comic convention. By that time, I had done over 400 interviews, video interviews on that show alone. I went up to Toronto at Fan Expo Canada. I did another 200 or so there. So in my very first 4 years, podcast aside, I had over almost close to 1,000 by that point. It's 2023 as of this recording. I've done a ton more. I've lost count by that standard. And I've had such an incredible experience interviewing creative and talented people in those varying industries. And I've learned so much, not only from an introspective perspective, which is really the style of my show, but also for myself as a person talking with these talented people. So that's the general gist of it. Plus, I have a documentary I've been putting together as well, too, called Little Person Amongst Media Giants. We could touch on a whole bunch, but I don't know what else you'd like me to touch on there, Simon.
Well, listen, thank you for the introduction, Kurt. It gives people a good understanding. And, you know, you mentioned that you switched to video. Did you say 2012?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's incredible. I only recently switched to full video podcasting on this podcast after we'd produced 400 written long-form interviews that were published. They were published on the web. But we had 400 written long form interviews with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. And then we decided, I think we got to season 59. So season 60 was the point where we turned it into video and audio podcast. And of course, we still have a written article about the discussion, but it really works for us. And there's me thinking, you know, this is great, but you were doing this back in 2012. At the time of recording this, we've got over 100 episodes already on this show, but you've way past 1,000 episodes already. So what do you put that down to? Is that workflow? Is that consistency? Is that you just, you know, were so busy, or did it just grow organically? What do you put it down to, Kurt?
Stubbornness and spite. No, realistically, it comes back to something. So I'm a naturally introverted person. I may not appear to be introverted because, you know, we all have two sides to ourselves when it comes to showcasing what we want to showcase. But I think for me, it was a transition period. It was something where I had interviewed so many webcomic creators, pretty much the entire amazing stable back in that day, of almost all of the popular ones as well at that time as well too. And I just needed a change. I needed something different because I was getting burnt out with the podcasting industry. I was putting so much time and effort into not short shows, by the way, either. They were 2-hour plus interviews, audio interviews. And back in 2008, the audio quality was not as good as, and that's horrible English, it wasn't as good technology back then, where we were recording in 64 hertz audio, which is just brutal when it comes to podcasting. Fast forward 10 years, it's a lot better now. But the transition from video to audio was just more of a seamless transition for me, because I had I had friends that were doing video work and telling me, hey, this is going to be the next big thing, especially with, this new thing called YouTube that's coming out. It's a great transition period for you to showcase your show on a new platform. Because the podcast was doing great. I had over 500,000 downloads in the first couple of years alone. So I think it was just, here's a new technology. Here's something I need to learn. How am I going to transition this when I do interviews at comic conventions? Because no one's going to stand around at a comic convention for 2 hours. It's not possible. You have to be cognizant of their time, and then they're making money. You're just a guy trying to get an interview. So for me, it was, how do I tighten up my script? How do I tighten up my questions? How do I get the most amount in a limited amount of time from a creative person that's extremely busy? So I made the conscious effort to do 5-minute video interviews at comic conventions. If it went over, great. If it was short, that's fine too. Because when you do 15-minute interviews with, say, Jill Thompson and Ramon Perez and things like that, when you got like CNBC behind you waiting to do their own interviews, that's kind of a great segment for one's ego and process as well. So 5-minute interviews was my limit at comic conventions, but I'd like to do 30 minutes to an hour with creative people on the Two Geeks Talking show.
And tell me, the niche that you're in, or the type of guests that you have on the show, could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because it's a wonderful community.
It varies. So because I'm doing entertainment interviews, I like to have the variety. I don't like to stick to just comics or just TV or film actors, actresses, directors, or musicians who are of a geeky nature, or just video game companies, whether they're independent or AAA. I like that variety because it keeps me interested and entertained in the guests that come on the show, because it's something different every single time. I don't know who they are besides my basic research until they've been on the show. Just time, technology, happenstance. I can't be everywhere all at once, unfortunately, unlike Michelle Yeoh in that amazing film. But I really think that it's a spice of being a show like this, because you're not into anything similar every single day. I think that it comes back to, doing this for 15 years. If you get burned out with one topic, you want to change it up. So, when I was doing the show in 2008 to 2012, I had a set batch of questions. I got bored with the questions, so I changed it up. So every 10 years or so, or 5 years or so, I'll switch up my questions to keep myself interested in the guests as well, too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about your setup today? Obviously, you were talking about the technology's change, right? So cameras have changed, my audio quality's changed.
Yeah.
The tools that we use, AI is a big thing now, seems to be becoming more and more prevalent in some podcasters' workflows. So what do you use? I mean, are you a technology sort of geek? Are you really getting into that type of stuff, or are you just sort of, look, it works, this is my system, this is how it goes? How does it work for you, Kurt?
Well, for me, I have the same Logitech C920 webcam I've had for decades. It feels like, 1080p quality. Like the only thing I've really upgraded more recently is I got a Rode microphone, the NT1. Honestly, I have the same old switchboard that I'm looking at and switchboard's old. I have the just my soundboard is what I have it plugged into. It's a very basic 2-channel, Sennheiser soundboard, Rode microphone. The only thing I really upgraded is the lights as well too. Got myself a green screen in the background as well. Technology wise, from a software perspective, I've been using XSplit for a number of years. A one-time cost to get the broadcasting software to do my actual recordings and videos, things like this, is great. I don't have to pay a monthly subscription or anything like that. The only thing I've done more recently is, say, for Zoom or for StreamYard, I've done from month to month if I need the time, because there's time limits for a lot of the software. I'll pay maybe month to month. I'll pay for the software to get guests on, so that I don't have to worry about disconnecting, reconnecting, little things like that interrupt the flow. But no, I've been in technology for 20 plus years. I was in IT for 20 years. I went back to university for visual arts, communication, media, and film with a minor in computer science as well, because why not do what you know? And so my computer's been upgraded every 7 years or so too. I have a decent setup for this stuff. Technology's in my blood. So I'm not going to get the latest and greatest, but if it works, I'm not going to change it until it breaks, basically.
I hear you. And you mentioned Rena Freeman Watts at the start. She's a great show called Better Call Daddy.
Yes.
Who I know you know Rena, and she has been a guest on this show too.
I've been on hers too.
But when it comes to advice for podcasters, because I talk to a lot of people in the creative field, and of course, podcasters, they know all about pod fade, they know all about burnout, they know all about the trials and tribulations of growing a community and growing an audience. But if you were starting again today, Kurt, this is really the key question. What would you do differently, or what would be your advice to somebody who, wants to get into podcasting, but really needs not the shortcut, but the best advice that you could possibly share from all the years that you've been involved? Because you've produced a lot of shows. So what would you say?
There's a couple of factors. I think there's three, maybe five, but I'll try to stick to three. Good audio. You have to have good audio. You cannot skimp on audio, because as my film teacher said, and I'll try to clean this up as much as I can, no matter if your video is great, if your audio is crap, no one's going to pay attention to the video. So you always have to have good audio for sure. Invest in a good microphone. Audio Technica AT2020 is what I used for a number of years. Great basic USB setup, loved it. Switched to the Rode, still love the quality. If you're doing video, focus on good lighting, but focus on shorts for your video itself. You can have a long form content and you can break it down into shorts. And Gary Vaynerchuk is one of the people I've admired for a good number of years as well too. I love his process of how he breaks down long format to short format. I've been trying to include that in a lot of my work more recently, because it takes time to do that, because I'm a more manual person. So focus on shorts if you're doing video as well too. Research your guests is my third point here as well too. Research as much as you can. There's a lot of people out there where you can look at the surface, you can look at their IMDb, you can look at their websites, but you can't really get to know a person, if say it's a comic person or whatever, unless you look at their socials, unless you look at everything else like that. Does it take time to do that? Yes, but you're a more informed interviewer in terms of the guests that you're going to have on this show. 4 and 5, you have to have social media, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever is not a dumpster fire currently, and you are constantly posting and promoting on that. It's not about sending links or retweeting or things like that. It's about making connections with people. Hey, I have a show. I'm interviewing this guest. Hey, here's a quick clip from our interview that you've posted on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube as well too. You're including your short content in your social media posts as well. And then just be a good person is my fifth point. To be honest, it's a struggle to be a podcaster. It's a struggle to be a guest and a host and things like that. Be aware of the person you're talking to. Be kind to them. Promote their work. Do as much as you can. Have them promote the show and the interview. And just be a good person, because we're only here for a short amount of time. Let's enjoy it while we can.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that, Kurt.
No.
I want to change gears a little bit, because I like to ask my guests a few questions around who they are, how things work for them. And one of the questions is about your own learning style. I know you produce a lot of shows, but are you listening to a lot of podcasts? Are you an audiobook person? Do you like physical books? Are you constantly searching YouTube? How do you learn? What's your learning style? And in this busy, connected digital world we find ourselves in, how do you onboard information today?
I'm more of a visual learner. I've always been a visual learner from even back in my IT days. You have to have hands-on experience with everything that you're trying or doing. So I think for me, if I'm watching a YouTube video or a series, or if I'm just watching some shorts as I'm doom scrolling the internet as I do. I think it comes back to picking up on things that I want to learn and I want to and try. Like, say I want to develop a video game, I will dive down a rabbit hole and I will research as much as I can. Now, whether I actively do it or not, it's more about gaining the knowledge of how to do it more so than actively doing it sometimes. From an audio perspective, I don't listen to many shows or podcasts, to be perfectly honest, because I don't have time. I really don't. I'd love to just be able to sit down for a couple of hours and just listen and watch something in the background or whatever. But if I'm not editing, I'm interviewing. If I'm not interviewing, I'm searching for guests. If I'm not searching for guests, I'm looking at other business opportunities, to do video editing work for, or to do audio work for, to do some graphic design, etc. So I'm being as active as I can with the time that I have. And so as much as I'd love to just, sit back, play some video games or whatever, I don't always have the time to do so, as much as my younger self is kicking me in the butt for. So.
Yeah, and I think you've raised a very interesting point, and it's something I wanted to ask you, which is around monetization for podcasters, because some people just put out a podcast because they love doing it. Other people have to make money to make it work. Some of the very successful big shows have quite large production budgets and costs behind it and teams of people behind it. So you've got everything from the person in the solo entrepreneur sitting in their bedroom trying to produce a show, through to very complex, intricate production teams working on podcasts with very nice looking studios. But when it comes to monetization, what are your views on that? Do you have any sort of advice for people about monetization? What's your view on this?
Monetization is a touchy subject, and I'll tell you why. So when I started this show back in 2008, and I started putting it up on YouTube, and let me put a caveat before all this. 15 years I've been doing this show. 15 of those years, I've had it for free. I've had no pay. I've had no sponsorship deals that have given me money. I've had monetization for YouTube until they shut it down in 2014 or 16 or whenever that was. But I only made about $100 because of the views. So long form content still to this day does not pay the bills. Plain and simple. Unless you have a specific niche, unless you're doing a how-to, unless you're doing education, unless you're doing things along that line, that because of the attention span of today's age, if short content is better, they will not sit through 30-minute shows, 15-minute shows, or anything like that. Plain and simple. So monetization is extremely tough and difficult unless you are actively getting sponsorship deals, or if you're actively getting views, or if your show has, and this is just a generalization, but from my own personal experience, monetization is very tough. Now, more recently, I've started to change my thought process on Two Geeks Talking as a business. And that is, I have free interview slots. I will always have free interview slots, but they're very limited because I know a lot of people cannot afford to come on shows and be interviewed. And I understand that. And I am well aware of the plight of people like that, because I want to make sure that they have a platform that they can come to showcase their work. That's my caveat. I've started pay service for the show as well. You get marketing, you get 30 days worth of marketing on various social medias. The price point is very reasonable for that respect. I do all the editing work. You're still going to get a top-notch work. There is no AI whatsoever in terms of this show. So this is all a manual process still. The quality of work is going to be there until I basically die. So that's why I had to start thinking of this as a business. I've done this show for 15 years for free. I can't do it anymore. I need to be able to support myself, support this show, and support the creators that are out there. And this is the only way I can actively do it. So if the show ever gets monetized back on, say, YouTube or Twitch or wherever this show is shown, or even through the podcast as well, because I did bring that back, then great. That's wonderful. But if you're going to do a show and you are thinking of literally, if you're thinking that your show is just going to be instantly monetized, you're going to have financial security, etc., you're in the wrong industry. That's not what's going to happen. it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and hard work for you to get to a monetized state.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. And you've raised the right points and excellent points, because I'm having conversations at the moment with a lot of B2B podcasters, and people with other businesses or other sort of side areas of interest that the podcast openly supports and drives people to, is where most of the monetization is actually happening, as opposed to, you can do a sponsorship deal, you might be able to do a brand deal depending on your audience, your downloads, your listenerships, etc. But they're typically, really the regard of the very high-end popular shows. And for a lot of B2B brands, they're finding tremendous value, not just in reach and building community, but in the knock-on effects it has for the other business that they're involved in. And podcasting is just one element of that media mix, I suppose, which is not too dissimilar from what you're doing with your own show, being able to provide this package service as well for people.
Yeah. Well, and that's great if you already have an existing community, if you already have an existing brand, or if you already have everything along that line, and that's wonderful. And that is a great way to diversify your reach and your goal of your show, etc. And a lot of, like I said, a lot of popular people do that. But if you're just starting out, you don't have that capability. You're building everything from the ground up. You are forced to learn this on your own, or learn through YouTube videos or whatever, to try to make yourself a brand and a business. And those that already have existing brands that are selling courses, that are doing everything like that to showcase that, yes, you can do it too. Well, you can. You're going to get a lot of cookie cutter shows out there that is not really your own authentic voice. And if you're going to do that just for the money, that's fine, but you're not really providing value to those that are out there.
What do you love about what you do today, Kurt? Because to do it for as long as you have, with the passion and the quality that you put into it, you must love what you do too. So what is it about podcasting? What is it about producing a show that you like?
It's the people, it's the guests, really. That's what keeps driving me all these years. No matter if they're famous or if they're brand new to the scene, whatever entertainment scene it is, I love the people. I love talking with them and hearing their passion for what they're doing and seeing their progression literally for years. I've looked back at some past episodes where the people that I've interviewed back then when they were just starting are now working for, say, Marvel or DC. Like, it's incredible to see their personal journey. While I feel like I'm still in my own bubble as I am, I love seeing everyone else's progression. And I'm glad that I was at least in some way, shape, or form part of their journey.
And one of the last things, I want to squeeze in a couple of quick questions at the end, but one of the key questions that I don't want to miss is about advice. Now, it can be advice about your own show, or it can be wider in terms of advice in life, because you've met a lot of people. You were just saying there, it's about the guests, it's about the people. Is there any advice that you've picked up along the way that you'd like to share with us today? Or is there things that you find yourself often telling people that you think is important for our audience to hear?
That's a tough question. Because I've interviewed so many people, it kind of all blurs. But I think because of the documentary I've been putting together for the last 12 or so years, Little Person Amongst Media Giants, I asked the same 4 questions at the end of every interview, where I was going to interview Stan Lee and I was going to ask him these 4 questions. That didn't happen. So I used these same questions for everyone else. So think of it like Inside the Actor's Studio, but more introspective is how I like to promote the show. And a lot of the questions, it depends on their own mindset at the time as I ask these questions. And so some people think of it as financial, as introspective, where they think that they need to be financially successful to be successful. But I think back to your question itself is just keep doing what you're doing, because no one else can tell your story. I think that's the most important quote that I've pulled from in all these years, because there are thousands of people out there. There are amazing people that are doing similar work to what you're doing, but only you can tell your story. And if you can, then there's someone that's in a similar point in their life that is reading your story, that maybe it'll help them. And I think that's the best piece of advice that I can remember.
Well, I like that a lot, Kurt. And look, as we do come towards the end of our time here, Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience? You've mentioned the documentary a couple of times. We haven't really explored that too. I'd love to know where that's at.
It's
And
not.
also, and importantly, would you make sure that you let us all know if people want to find out more about you, about the work that you do, about the show, and to keep up to date with the documentary, where do you want to send people to or point people to?
Well, here's how I'll wrap this up by how I do my normal intro, and it is this. You can find me at twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO, not the number two, completely different website you don't want to go to, or tgtmedia.com. The website's going through an update. Unfortunately, it's been going on update for a number of years, but you can go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast is back after 12 or so years because, reasons, and I'm only one person. You can find that at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or wherever you get your podcasts, because it's available everywhere. Just search for Two Geeks Talking. And of course, as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on, in this case, the global discussion, but it is Two Geeks Talking as well.
Well, thank you, Kurt. It's been a great pleasure to catch up with you today. That's a nice point for us to end this episode of the global discussion. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to us around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe. Do everything I need you to do to help support the podcast. Of course, go and check out all the great work that Kurt's doing. And I hope you join me back here for more discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. But thank you, Kurt. It's been wonderful to catch up with you today.
Thanks, Simon. I really appreciate it.